So tonight, my goal is to start a conversation. It's going to be between you and other people, between you and churches, but mostly I want it to be between you and God, because I think that our relationship with social media is a conversation we need to be having, but I think it's really important to be having it with God first before we go too much further. All right, so before I go too much further, let's talk about, some of this is pre-COVID, so bear with me here. There's only so many new facts as we go. But let's look at the world and what's been happening. So on average, people can't go longer than 12 minutes without checking their phone. And in that survey of 2,000 people, 1 in 10 check their phones every 4 minutes. And 4 hours was the longest someone considered reasonable to be away from their phone, which I kind of agree with. Like, I understand why 4 hours. I wouldn't want to be away from my phone for longer than 4 hours either. We're starting to see headlines like the dangers of distracted parenting. When it comes to children's development, parents should worry less about screen time and more about their own, or they're paying less attention because of their handheld devices. Now, what's super interesting in this is that early childhood educators and daycare workers began noticing that kids ages 3, 4 were showing up at daycare and they weren't able to make eye contact and they couldn't express emotion. And then psychologists started looking into it and they were actually able to trace it back to the lack of eye contact that was happening while nursing. And so what happened is we'd taken for granted that kids learn how to make safe eye contact, mirror emotion, and build healthy relationships. But that comes as a result of face-to-face contact time, and particularly while nursing. Now, these moms aren't being bad moms. I 100% would have been that mom because they're multitasking and they're being efficient with their time. But we didn't realize that this is affecting a child's development. And we realized eventually, but it was 4 years later. So there's 4 years of kids that have now are wrestling with this. Then you might have seen this article. It went around last August. And at first when I looked at it, I was like, whoa. And then it started to be like, oh, yep, this might be you at home right now. But the examples of, hey, we can be right next to each other. And when this photographer took the phone out of the pictures, it makes our worlds look really lonely. And it almost made me think we're desperate to be with other people as long as it's not in person. And like, what's wrong with us? There's people in love sitting next to each other and family members, and we're not even looking at each other because we're so focused on our devices. Now, it's not really all our fault. Facebook has an endless feed. Netflix is automatically loading the next episode. And so on top of our lack of willpower, there's actually thousands of people, and it's their entire job to figure out how to keep our attention. And so we're selling our attention to these apps and these developers. So it's their job to break that down. Now, little South Korea, tiny little country, they have 300 internet addiction rehab centers that they've created to help with this problem because they see this as a problem. But they're a small country. Imagine if we were to actually investigate what that looks like in Canada or in any other like Western country. I'm sure we're going to need rehab centers for this. Now, in my research and as I was digging into this problem and learning more about it, I read the book Digital Minimalism by Cal Newport. And it was super helpful. He's a little bit of he doesn't use social media, so that was a unique, yeah, thanks Kevin, he's got a picture of it. He doesn't use social media, so he was telling me what to do because he thought that made sense. But so that's a perspective, but it was definitely helpful. And he said, he was looking and he was researching, and he said that there was a noticeable increase in depression, anxiety, and suicide attempts, and just suicide in general, with people who were born between the ages of 1995 or born in the years 1995 to 2012. And the only real difference that he could distinguish between this generation of people and a millennial was that this was the first age group that had constant access to social media, constant access to their phone, and constant access to internet. And so we started learning 14 or 15 years later that these kids were walking out with increased levels of anxiousness, depression, and then thoughts of suicide. So what then made me start thinking was, I was thinking around and looking in my world and saying, okay, people who were born in 1995, what do they look like? And right now, people who were born in 1995, they're starting to graduate university or have just graduated university. They're starting to join, like, build their career, decide what direction they want to go in. Some of them are getting married outside of Toronto. Some people in Toronto are getting married at that age, but I don't know many. They're starting to have kids. But I remember thinking back to when I graduated university, that was a huge adjustment because my friends were pursuing one career or life focus, and I was pursuing another one. And that feeling okay with the direction that I was taking in my life was a big struggle. I dealt a lot with FOMO and am I, is this the right career for me? And is this the direction I should be going in? And I'd only had experience, Facebook came out when I was in first year. So that was only 5 years of, I took a 5-year program, but it was only 5 years of Facebook and social media that I'd been conditioned to. Imagine these kids that have been exposed to social media for a decade and a half, decades, and they're starting to come into this really stressful period of time. So if you know someone who's graduating university right now, starting a career, please send them a text and tell them that they're okay and that this is all right. Because I think we need to pay attention to this age group. They're really wrestling with this. Now, with all of that, I drew on my slides, I think. Sorry. First, we talked about the first few days of social media. Then came COVID. So I want to read you this report that came in the article. It's a Forbes article. It came out in the end of April. And what it says is, in the face of crisis, social media usage has surged once more. There we go. A study of 25,000 consumers across 30 markets showed engagement increasing 61% over normal usage rates. Messaging across Facebook, Instagram, and WhatsApp have increased 50% in countries hardest hit by the virus. Twitter is seeing 23% more daily users than a year ago. And when it matters most, people, even the delete Facebook diehards, are turning to social media for updates and connection, which I think is super interesting and not overly surprising, because if you think about it, I live on my own. My only contact to the outside world is through my social media and my phone. I have to use my social media to have any type of community. So it does make sense. And it's really cool to see that in the countries most hit, they're being able to use social media and to interact and build that community. But I think we need to pay attention to, we just saw the hardships that are happening. Is that residual effect happening and adjusting how we're using social media right now? So let's just keep going. I don't know how that dark line got there, and I'm not going to try and figure it out now. So we'll just figure that out. Okay, so all that being said, the next obvious question started to become, or I forgot to ask this question for a long time, but what does God say about technology? Because I mean, FaceTech helped a lot with that, but I remember for months last summer, I had giant sticky notes on my walls that just had the problem of social media outlined, and I could see how it was affecting my world and affecting other people's lives, and I just couldn't figure out what to do with it. And I remember looking at it, I think I was brushing my teeth, and I remember just thinking, God, like, here's the problem. Where are you in the solution? What is the solution? I don't know how to take you and put you into this social media world with my phone. What does that even look like? And I've actually come to realize that God's not afraid of technology. He's actually really cool with it, and he uses it on a regular basis and is often pretty creative with that. And that was really inspiring and really encouraging. And I think that's one of the things I love about Faith Tech, even though I'm not a techie. I love that Faith Tech keeps bringing up this conversation that God is a passionate, creative, strategic, technical God, and that's super cool. So I want to bring us into some examples of when God used technology, because I just had no idea that, and I grew up in the church and no one talked about this. So first off, if we look at the very beginning, God in the Garden of Eden, God's a creator. He created the world, and he used his language. He said, okay, let there be light. Let there be earth, or let there be earth. Let there be water. Let there be plants. Let there be animals. He used his words, or he used his language to program the world. We're all familiar with using language to build things. So he used his language to program the world. Then with his words, his language, he programmed us to be made in his image. He said, I want people that are also creators. I want them to be made like me. So he designed us to be creators with him, which is just so cool. And there's more stories in the Garden of Eden of him just being super excited about us inventing clothes and honoring and blessing that creation. And I'm not going to get into that now, but it's super cool. And I'll give you resources to read about that afterwards. But he designed us to be creators. He used language, which is a tool and a technology. He used language to program the world so that we could see, and that it's part of the very beginning of foundation of who we are and how the world was made. So let's fast forward a big chunk of time. And so if we go to Tower of Babel, now before that, we've already had Adam and Eve. We've had Noah, and he had the ark. And that's also a super cool story because God gave him blueprints to build a tech piece that no one had ever seen before. So that's cool. Just put that on the side over there. But God talked through written language. There's so much stuff in here. But when Noah, after the ark and after the flood, God said to Noah, be fruitful and increase in number and fill the earth. So that was a blessing, but it was also a commandment to the people to now fill the earth. So then the world started growing, and the people started becoming multiple, many of them. And they are all speaking one language. And they started to look at each other and they said, hey, what if we were to build a tower that was so big, it reached to the heavens, it looked so good, and people started knowing our names? And so what they decided was they rejected God's plan of be fruitful and multiply and spread across the earth. And they said, you know what, we're just going to camp out here because I think we can really build something that's going to be really cool and people will know who we are. And so they rejected God's plan for their technology and their glory, which, I mean, how convicting is that? How many times have we been like, nah, cool, God, I'm not even going to look into what you're saying. I'm just going to focus on some cool technology, this sweet app, or my job, and get a name for myself. And I'm not going to worry about your plan right now. Like, super convicting. And so God is God. He could have done anything. He could have, this is before Jericho, but he could have just snapped his fingers and taken the walls down. He could have done a flood again, even though he promised not to. He could have sent a thunderbolt to redirect him. But he decided to use technology to shift them. And they love this. So we know language. Remember I said language is a technology. It's a tool. So God says, hey, they're all speaking one language. I'm going to confuse their language so that they're all going to have to reset. And they're going to have to find different family groups and different community groups. And as their language is shifted, their sense of identity and their relationships reprogrammed. And so then as a result, the like-speaking communities began to move off and separate out. Now, God's goal wasn't confusion. He's not a God of confusion, but he did want them to fulfill his commandment. And he was able to change their behavior. I love this. He's able to change their behavior without taking away their free will or destroying their creation to do it. He just shifted how they were thinking and what they were saying to be able to move all of that around. So he used technology to say, hey, we still have this plan. I still need to move this direction. Let's keep going in this direction. So super cool side story there. Then if we fast forward, we go back up to Jesus and his time. So that was the Roman era and the Roman rule. And as part of the Roman, I love history if you haven't caught on, but as part of how the Romans did their thing, they would have a role within their army that would be made up of laborers, business, government people. And so when they landed in a territory, all of this unit of business government and labor people would show up in an area, and their job was to be present in that new place and to make the culture of the new place be like the culture of Rome. So the goal was that if the emperor were to show up in anywhere within his territory, it would be exactly like when he was back in Rome. And these people were called apostles. That was the job, and that was the strategy of the Roman Empire, was to bring the culture of Rome into the culture of their new place. Now, not necessarily a great strategy now, but it was what they were using at the time. Now, Jesus, in that whole era, is looking at the society and looking at the world and saying, hey, this idea of having someone take a culture and bring it to a new territory by being present in that new land and bringing that culture in, that's something that's making sense to my people that I'm talking to, and it's working. I'm going to use that language when I talk to my people. So we know the word apostle because Jesus uses it to describe his followers, the people that he wants to take his culture and move it in by being present into the world and saying, hey, let's bring God's culture, the kingdom of heaven culture, let's bring that to earth and be the apostles. So he used a tool and a strategy and the language that was being implemented by a horribly heathen government and said, hey, let's use that. We can copy pieces of this and the strategy in our world. So that's an example of God using technology, Jesus using technology. Now, this book has probably been one of the most helpful books I have ever read on this topic. And it's by John Dyer, From the Garden to the City. He was on the last Faith Tech Global call, just hanging out in the wings. But he said in this quote, God seems to always be at the forefront of the technological usage. There is no wait and see policy. Instead, God is always working through the tools of the day as he accomplishes his redemptive program. And I think this was a moment where everything switched for me. And I realized God's not afraid of tech. He's using it in ways I didn't even know was possible. But this is our God. This is who we serve. Oh, yes, John Dyer's speaking in a couple, next soon, 10 days. Guys, you don't want to miss that. He's awesome. A lot of the stuff is his, so he knows I'm using it, but he's really cool. All right. So before we go too much further, I wanted to talk about tech being a value set. So I talked about how God's not afraid of technology, but I also want to talk about what this means. Because a year ago, I used to think that technology was a tool. And if I use it for good, technology was good. And if I use it for bad, then it was bad. But what I've come to realize is that technology is a value set. So when I use that technology, I'm aligning with that value set. So for example, if I use my Google Maps, I am choosing to align to the values of not thinking critically where I'm going, to trusting my map to know exactly and to figure out the entire route, think through all the details and the timing. I have abdicated and aligned with those values, but I've abdicated my rights to really control that, right? Because I've chosen to use the values of the app. This can go for really any decision. If I'm choosing to buy a Harvey's, which I love, I'm choosing to value fast, convenient, tasty, but not healthy. Whereas if I was to choose something healthier, maybe made from home, I'm looking for health, I'm looking for nourishment, I'm looking for quality, and I'm choosing, when I make a decision, I'm choosing my values that I'm using when I make that decision. So knowing that, thinking about, okay, if technology is a value and how I use tech is affected by the values I'm selecting, what does that mean and how do we use our social media? So first thing we need to look at is values in general. So regardless of technology or social media right now, what do you want your values to be that you live by? If you were to, it's a bit morbid thought, but if you were to pass away tomorrow, how do you want people to describe you in your eulogy? You don't want people to list out your resume. I want people to say that I'm full of life and I'm loyal and I'm faithful and I'm full of joy. I don't want people to say she was a trainer and then she worked as an instructional designer, and I don't care. And I actually don't think they'll remember. But I want to live in a way that people are going to say the things I want them to say in the long run, not out of fear, but out of like, these are the values that I'm choosing to focus on. And then what do you even want God's role to be in that? Is he just a side player, or is he actually intertwined in the whole thing? Now, an easy piece, I think this is a good activity. That's the only thing you walk away from, is figuring out like, what values do I want to be aligned to in my own life? It's a worthwhile activity. But I think the Bible has a lot to say, and there's many values throughout the Bible that God's always talking about. And as a Christian, I want to be aligning myself to God's values and constantly trying to work towards being more Christ-like. So a couple quick examples. These are two values that I've pulled. There's tons in the Bible, but we're just going to focus on two tonight. And the first one is presence. God values presence. And he values presence with him, and he values presence with other people. So I'm going to throw a couple of Bible verses at you. Maybe Kevin can type them down for you. They're not on my slides. But John 15:4-5, it says, "Remain in me, and I will also remain in you. No branch can bear fruit by itself. It must remain in the vine. Neither can you bear fruit unless you remain in me. I am the vine, and you are the branches. If you remain in me, and I in you, you will bear much fruit. Apart from me, you can do nothing." So that's present with God. In Mark 6:31, it also says, "Because so many people were coming and going, they did not even get a chance to eat. And he said to them, 'Come with me by yourselves to a quiet place and get some rest.'" Now, what does it look like to be with God, to be present with God, and to be aware of him in our day-to-day? Those are whole other questions that you guys can think about, but something worth asking and looking into. So then the next question is, what does it mean to be present with other people? And all through the New Testament, again, I hadn't seen this until John Dyer pointed it out to me, but Paul and John in all of their books of the Bible, they keep saying, "I wish I was with you in person, but instead I'm going to write this letter for you." And you can see them wrestling with the technology of their day, and they're saying, "Hey, like, I really want to be there, but I have this tool, and I'm going to have to use this tool because I can't be there." And how cool is that because they decided to use their technology, then we actually get to take advantage of that in the future. Socrates, I think it was, he didn't even use the pen because he was afraid of it. He just thought that was like the end of something horrible. And so as a result, I think other people wrote down his thoughts, but they're being forward thinkers because they're writing their stuff down. They're using technology. Now, the last piece here is when we're with Jesus, the fruits of being with Jesus is the fruits of the Spirit. So love, joy, peace, patience, kindness, goodness. But then there's also faithfulness and long suffering. So what does that look like? And to be real, like, we're now at home, we're going through a pandemic, so this is different. But what does it look like to be faithful when we are with our family members? So maybe we're on a work call, a Zoom call, we're in a friendship and we're doing that long distance, or we're sitting with family members or a partner right now, and it gets boring. I'll be honest, when my team starts talking about JavaScript and CSS, I don't care. I don't understand, and it is really hard for me to pay attention. And I'm very tempted, or sometimes do, just go onto my phone. But what if we're with a friend and we're talking to them and they're really struggling with something and they just can't seem to get their heads around this pandemic, or they're wrestling with anxiety or depression or just discouragement in general? What's happening when we're in those moments often? I know I am very tempted to I'm bored and it's hard, and I'm like, I'm just going to check my phone. And I don't say this, but I accidentally pick my phone up and my thumb just accidentally opens up my phone and I'm already online, and I've all of a sudden disconnected from their conversation because it's easier, because someone probably needs me. But that's not faithfulness, and that's not long suffering. And how convicting is that? Like, the number of times I've accidentally done that in meetings or with people, and sometimes I do it purposely and sometimes I don't even realize I'm doing it. But that's not being faithful, and that's not being long suffering with the people in our lives and the people we're living with right now. Now, another value of God's is dependence. So dependence on him and dependence on other people. So one really obvious example, and it struck really close to home, is David in 2 Samuel 24 and also 1 Chronicles 21. They tell the story twice. David decided to take a census of his whole population and all of his resources because he just wanted to see, like, how am I doing? And in the moment, like I get it. I have a Fitbit. I track my sleep. I track my steps. I love seeing progress. I love tracking trends. This is interesting to me. But God severely rebuked him. Like, I think he gave three options. You can die. Other people can die through famine, or we can have a war. Which do you want as a result of this decision? Those are big consequences for a nation, affecting a nation. But what God was rebuking wasn't that statistics were bad. It was that he knew that if David did this census, it would increase David's pride and it would decrease his dependence on God. Which, like, how familiar does that sound? How many times subconsciously, I don't necessarily know I'm doing it, but I check my Instagram before I go to bed, check my Facebook, see if anyone noticed or liked or made comments, and I accidentally let that validate me before going to God and then I just don't think about having God time because I've satisfied whatever question I had or whatever, like, does anyone need to talk to me? Does anyone know I'm doing something? And I don't think to go and talk to God as a result of that. So super convicting, and I'm very grateful we live in the New Testament world, not in the Old Testament anymore. Now, the one more thing I want to say on dependence, Christ modeled a life depending on the Heavenly Father. That's in the Holy Spirit, but he modeled a life, and he just says in John 5:19, very truly I tell you, the Son can do nothing by himself. He can only do what he sees his Father doing, because whatever the Father does, the Son also does. And so this was Christ's whole mandate. This was how he lived, was fully dependent on God and how he lived. So we talked about values, we had dependence, and we have presence with God and presence with other people. So once we know our value set, then we start asking questions, which is my favorite part. So what you need to do is you figure out, okay, let's start looking at the patterns of behavior over time. Once I know what my values are and what I want to become, is my use of this tool, so this could be my social media, this could be by app, this could be by tool, by phone, you could do this on everything. I have started doing this on everything, and I really dislike my friends who do it back to me because they've started doing it to me, which I don't appreciate all the time, but they're helpful. So you look and say, okay, my behavior over time using this device, is it reflecting God and his values, or is it reinforcing independence? What's happening when I use this device? So I'm going to use Instagram. When I started using Instagram, I was very insecure because my friends were all creative photographers and I am not. So my pictures were not of quality. They weren't worth posting. Then I couldn't think of anything witty to say to go with them. So I didn't post for a really long time. And when I finally did start posting, I started to notice I was paying a lot more attention to my comments, to my likes, to the messages that I was getting, and I was putting a lot of value in that, and I was becoming independent from God because my value was coming out of the interaction I was getting on my app. If we go into COVID, I closed my house the day that as the essential workers were defined. So I didn't know if I was going to move as like the house, as that happened. Like I was contacting my lawyer saying, are you essential? Can we please close this? And then I had to move by myself for over 25 days to move into my new location. So I was dealing with a lot of stress. And then in social media land, that's my only contact to the outside world. People are throwing around fear like it was not like snowballs, like all over the place were new stats, new fear videos. And part of that was us learning, and part of us was responding to trauma and responding to facts. But I remember thinking at the end of a week and being like, I have underestimated how hard this is. This is a mind game, and I did not prepare for this. And I was anxious and I couldn't shake it. And yes, I was in the middle of closing a house and a lot of other things were adding to that. But I remember just thinking 7-10 days in, like, this is not ending. And what am I going to do? And I can't continue to live like this. And my behavior, I wasn't so much independent. I was just stressed and anxious. And I was like, this has to change. So that's the behavior over time. Next question you ask is, what problem is it solving? I think now more than ever in Instagram social media situation, it's solving community. So that's important. I don't think it's smart to just fully cut it out altogether because that's isolating. Even the delete Facebook people are coming back. So you look at what problem is it solving? And then the last question is it worth it? how can I use this in a way that's still allowing me to align with my values and God's values, so that I'm not fully thrown into this like fear, anxious cycle or fully independent world? How can I still use it? If I think it's worth it, how do I still use it? And so what I ended up doing, I remember waking up, so this is like end of March, early April, realizing like, okay, new rules. I will not read my social media before I have God time in the morning. I will not, what were my other rules? I just wrote them down. I will limit my news intake because I only want to know actual news. I don't want to know fear-based news. I want to know unbiased news. So I limited who I took news from so I could trim that down, trim that messaging. And I unfollowed people and I hid people that were just throwing around all these videos because they were like, wow, wow, wow. And they just kept posting everything. And I didn't realize until last summer that I could actually unfollow people without unfriending them. So you're welcome if you didn't know that. But you can still be friends with people without having to get them in your newsfeed every morning. And that's not unloving, that's you being taking care of yourself and being godly and wise. So that was some examples of some rules I set. And now as a result of that, obviously I've moved, I'm feeling much more settled and calmer. And so I'm not, some of those rules have shifted a bit and I'm much more lenient with my use a bit more, but I'm still monitoring, is this taking me away from God? Is this affecting, who am I dependent on as a result of this? And I've used this with, I love to read. And so I did a fiction fast back in October, which was rough because I like fiction. So I didn't watch movies or books, and that was really hard. And I realized that's not necessarily the answer. But the question I started to ask myself was, what is feeding this? And why am I thinking that this, like a story or this TV show or this book or whatever, is fixing me, like filling a need when I can't go to God? And I actually started to journal about it. And there was this one TV series that I loved, and I'd go to God and say, okay, which I just realized this is a bit weird to say, but why not talk to God about your TV shows? He already knows you're watching them. Like, why not? So I was journaling and I was like, hey God, I really like this character and I really like the characteristics of this person. I love this storyline. This is why I'm drawn to it. This is what's giving me the urge to watch it more. This is what I want in my life and this is why I'm craving it. And then I just was like, your turn. I'm just telling you, here's what I'm attracted, like, here's what I'm drawn to. Now it's your turn. I don't know what to do with this. But even just the act of writing it down and saying, and identifying what it was that was drawing me into that show was such a relieving moment to just say, okay, God, now you know this is apparently something I really crave. Now it's your turn to deal with it. You tell me how to help me and what to walk through. And that helped a significant amount to actually reduce it. You still have to monitor it, but it helped a lot just to identify and say, hey, God, now I need your help in this area. And this is why I'm attracted to this show, movie, TV, game, Netflix, whatever, social media, all of it. So that was my little soapbox there. Sorry. So yeah, your values, you figure out what your values are, you ask your questions. And then the last thing is we figure out our boundaries. And I covered some of those, but we look at what's our boundaries based off of presence or dependence. And so quick ones, I talked about unfollowing people that you don't have to follow or you don't have to unfriend. A couple key verses that are super convicting for me. Philippians 4:8, whatever is true, honorable, right, pure, lovely, good repute, excellent, worthy of praise, dwell on these things. What are you dwelling on your newsfeed? In your Netflix subscription, in your books that you're reading, in your games you're playing, are they honorable? Are they true? Are they right? Are they excellent and good repute? Because that's what you're dwelling on. That's what you're feeding yourself with. And then Galatians 5:22, since we live by the Spirit, let us keep in step with the Spirit. Let us not become conceited, provoking and envying each other. Does your newsfeed cause you to envy? Does your newsfeed provoke you? Does your newsfeed can make you conceited? And I will be first to say, a couple of years ago, I was watching someone's Insta story and I accidentally yelled in anger at response to something because I wanted their life. And I was like, oh, okay, you need to unfollow them. You do not need this. This is affecting you more than you realize. So you need to change this. And that's okay. This is important. So presence, some quick strategies here. Switch your phone to black and white. I've been doing that, and man, do you not want to be on your phone. It is not fun to look at. There's nothing flashy catching your eye. Instagram is no appeal to you anymore. Like, that actually was incredibly helpful because I just got bored. I was like, man, there's nothing new to see. It's black and white. And you can change that in your settings, and I can do it so I can turn it on and off as I need to. So sometimes I'll look at it quickly for a video and then I'll turn it back off. Turn off your notifications, because when it's on and you can still feel them or hear them. Put your phone away. And then now I say that, and pre-COVID, I said that, especially when you're with people. If you live with people, especially spouses, it's not that you have your own rules, and that's important. I do think, I remember thinking this before COVID, and I agree with it now in COVID. Like, I live on my own. My only contact with the outside world is through my phone. So I'm giving myself grace. And I remember a moment in the middle of this where I'm like, I can't keep monitoring my screen time because this is my outside world contact time, not just my screen time. And so giving myself grace, but monitoring it, because I think we need community and we need connection, but we need to do it in a way that's healthy and still building us up instead of ripping at our souls. Then embracing the first conversation and the first awkward conversation. This just dawned on me a little while ago, but for thousands of years, every conversation we had with a person, the first one was always awkward, and we just assumed it would be awkward. But for some reason, in the last 3-5 years, we've started to get really paranoid of having an awkward first conversation. And I think it's because we're so used to talking online. So we're like, what if I'm not smart or witty or like clever in the first conversation? But we never thought that way, or like, we as human beings never thought that way for 3,000 years. So why are we so worked up about that now? Let's just embrace the awkward and realize we're all feeling awkward, and it's going to be fine. And once you laugh it off, you're golden. It's okay. So that will help with your networking. That will help with your church lobby conversations. It will help with all of it. Now, for dependents, limit how often you go on and when you check. I've definitely done it where I only check mornings, lunches, and evenings. I've done seasons of it. I haven't done it. I don't always do it for my life rule. I have screen time turned on my phone. I think it's called digital well-being on Android. So it gives me reports on how much I'm spending, and I can see how much my social media use is being, is going up or down. I also have limits by app that turn off my app. I hide Instagram. It's on the last screen of my phone, so it's awkward to get to. I often also delete Instagram off my phone because the Facebook or the social media browser experience is horrible. And so as a result, I don't want to be on Instagram if it's a horrible experience. So I go on it less. I'm not on it, I'm just on it less. So I make it awkward for myself, so I don't want to be on it as much. And then really asking yourselves, what need am I fixing? What need am I trying to solve by going on social media in order to talk to someone, engage with someone? What does that look like, and how can I go to God with it? And I know right now it's difficult because God is not physically right beside us saying, hey, like, high five, it's so great to see you. And that's different. And I've asked that question too, being like, hey, what does community look like now? But I do think he has solutions and answers. And I think someone once said, God has all the answers. We just forget to ask him the question. And so I think it's worth asking because he's not surprised. I don't think COVID threw him off. I think he's like, cool. I mean, not cool, but let's keep going. I've still got a plan. This isn't changing my plan at all. So all that to say, I think this is the beginning of a conversation. I'm giving you a lot of tools and ideas, but I'm not giving you the be all and end all. And this isn't going to be a one size fits all. God might call you to stricter boundaries than someone else, and that's okay. I remember getting really frustrated about that because it wasn't fair that other people were able to watch some shows and I couldn't, and I feeling convicted, and that was annoying. And a friend of mine once said, she's like, look at John the Baptist. He lived pure isolation in the middle of nowhere because he felt God called him to, and to eat bugs. That was his calling. But then look at Paul, and his ministry was to live in the city, have a job, live and work with Gentiles. And so he was like fully immersed in the world. And John was fully separate. And they both had powerful ministries, but they were called to different standards of boundaries, which is super interesting. And I found encouraging to be like, okay, this isn't the Bible. Like, this isn't just annoying for me. This was annoying for other people too. And that's okay. God can call you to one, and it can look different than someone else's. So to close, God values you. He values you before you posted any witty comments or any beautiful pictures. He knows your interests and your hobbies and your passions, but he designed you to be most comfortable in his presence and dependent on him. That's how he designed you, to be in his presence and dependent on him. And he's constantly trying to remind us of this and get our attention. It's just, we often let the noise of our apps and our devices and our stories and our video games and our TV shows get in the way of that. He's always communicating the same message, that he designed us to be in his presence and to be dependent on him, and to be with him. So my big question for you guys is, how's your tech making you more present and more dependent on Christ? Because I think it's possible, but it's a question, and it's something you have to actually work through. So let me pray, and then we'll do Q&A, and then there are some resources. I know Kevin's been posting a bunch. And there's so many comments coming in. Sorry, I didn't catch those. God, I thank you that you're good and that you're faithful, and that you're not surprised by COVID. You're not surprised by social media or technology. And you're not surprised that we struggle with our attention to it. Father, I ask that you forgive us for making them into idols and using them instead of approaching you, and letting ourselves be not present with our friends and family. Father, I ask that you help us walk this out with you. Help us walk out this conversation and determine what are the right boundaries for me and my phone use. And God, that this becomes a conversation that you begin pointing out and saying, hey, this is when I want your attention, and this is what I'm trying to tell you. So Father, I ask that you open our ears to what you're saying. And Father, I ask that you help us walk this line with wisdom and with grace for ourselves, grace with other people, and with your strategy. Amen. All right, Kevin, Amen. Questions? These are a couple of the books that I talked about. The other big one that I just discovered is the Vice and Virtue podcast. You guys had Adam, I can't remember his last name. He spoke, sorry?
Adam Graeber.
Yes, Adam Graeber. He spoke with you guys before COVID.
Yeah, February.
This is his podcast, and it has been so helpful to talk through social media, talk through Facebook privacy, right now they're talking through contact tracking. They did giving up Lent, the giving up social media for Lent. That's how I learned about the black and white. And so these guys are just really helpful. My group at work, actually, I've got them. We're listening to one of the podcasts and talking about it this week. That's our lunch chat. But they're super helpful, useful tool. I'm getting everyone I know to